Welcome to NTD Newsroom. I'm Don Ma. Democrats accuse the DOJ of political persecution, but Republicans suggest former FBI Director James Comey could be facing further charges after senators reveal his FBI was spying on conservative lawmakers. President Trump is calling for jail time for Chicago's mayor and Illinois governor, accusing them of failing to protect ICE officers operating in the city. Day 8 of the government shutdown. Lawmakers are still at an impasse while they pivot to emergency measures to pay troops and air traffic controllers to avoid flight delays. The Supreme Court today reviewed whether a candidate for Congress can sue to challenge the legality of a state election rule that benefits Democrats. Testimonies on freedom of speech were presented before a Senate committee today. This expands on a report that found the federal government allegedly pressured social media companies to silence Americans. A suspect has been arrested in connection with the deadly Palisades fire in California that destroyed thousands of homes and killed 12 people. Authorities say digital evidence and his behavior that night link him to the fire.
This is NTD Newsroom, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. Former FBI Director James Comey was arraigned this morning and pleaded not guilty to 2 felony charges. Our Washington correspondent, Luis Eduardo Martinez, has the details.
Earlier today at 10 a.m., former FBI Director James Comey was arraigned here at the Albert Bryan Federal Courthouse of the Eastern District of Virginia. Judge Michael Nachmanoff read the 2 felony charges that James Comey is facing. The first one for providing false testimony to Congress, and the second one for obstructing a congressional investigations. These refer to testimony that James Comey provided to the Senate Judiciary Committee back in 2020. James Comey was then asked by senators whether he had authorized information from FBI investigations to be leaked to the press, which he denied. And now, of course, prosecutor U.S. Attorney Lindsey Halligan is arguing that that testimony was false, and it thus also obstructed a congressional investigation.
Seen enough on Comey that I think that he deserves a day in court. I believe that there's been sufficient evidence that has emerged that would show potential wrongdoing. Obviously, Comey deserves due process, as does anyone else.
Democratic lawmakers are arguing that the trial against former FBI Director James Comey is political persecution of Trump's rivals.
Donald Trump and the administration continues to weaponize the Department of Justice and are engaging in this effort, unprecedented in nature, to go after perceived political enemies like James Comey.
Republican lawmakers are actually insisting on further charges to be levied against former FBI Director James Comey, in particular for Operation Arctic Frost. On Tuesday, the Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Senator Chuck Grassley revealed that at least 8 Republican lawmakers were being surveilled by the FBI during the Biden administration and under the leadership of former FBI Director James Comey.
Why are we looking at Comey? Because he ran an FBI and personally knew about exculpatory information and let it slide. You tell me why my phone records, when I'm the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, were sought by the Jack Smith agents.
It's important to note that Judge Michael Nachmanoff, who is overseeing this trial, was a Biden appointee from 2021. After today's arraignment hearing, the judge set the start of the trial for January 5th of 2026. Reporting from Alexandria, Virginia, Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
An Illinois congressman asked the Supreme Court today to allow him to sue the state of Illinois for counting votes 14 days after the polls close, which generally benefits Democrats more than Republicans.
Then Illinois is counting unlawful ballots. Those unlawful ballots could cost Congressman Bost the election, or at least reduce his margin of victory, and he has to pay his campaign staff for 2 extra weeks.
The justices struggled to see how the congressman would be substantially harmed by this law, which is a requirement under the doctrine of standing to bring the case in the first place. If he can't show he has standing, the congressman's lawsuit cannot proceed. Some of the justices chided the attorney for not including more effective arguments in his complaint. such as an argument that pointed to the impact this law has on Republicans. A Justice Department attorney said the risk of losing the election is enough. If the justices are not convinced that there is substantial injury, the complaint will be dismissed. The president today called for jailing Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson and Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker. In a Truth Social post, Trump accused them of failing to protect ICE immigration officers who have been operating in Chicago. Pritzker responded on X saying he is not backing down, and Johnson said in a video that he is, quote, not going anywhere. The White House didn't immediately respond to requests for comment. Federal officials are on the ground in Portland and Chicago this week as the Trump administration moves to deploy federal law enforcement. Local leaders are speaking out against it, while Washington says it's necessary. Here's what's happening.
Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem visited Portland Tuesday, warning local leaders she could send 4 times as many federal officers if the city doesn't provide additional security. She said her meeting with Mayor Keith Wilson went poorly.
And I'm so extremely disappointed. He's continuing to play politics, did not commit to any of those promises, and said that he'd give me an answer by tomorrow.
Mayor Keith Wilson said Portland continues to manage public safety responsibly, despite federal claims of chaos. He added that federal officers must meet the same standards as the city's police. Noem also visited the local ICE facility where protesters have previously clashed with law enforcement. On Sunday, a federal judge temporarily blocked the deployment of National Guard members to Portland for the second time. The White House has appealed the ruling. Oregon Governor Tina Kotek says she's happy Noem is on the ground to assess the situation and push back against the secretary's statements.
As governor, my job is to stand up for Oregonians, protect them, and just have a direct conversation with the federal administration about what is happening on the ground here in Portland. No one in Oregon is interested in seeing military policing on our streets when people are protesting peacefully.
In Chicago, FBI Director Kash Patel and Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche toured the local field office Tuesday. They emphasized a whole-of-government approach to target violent crime and illegal immigration.
It was just, for me personally, rejuvenating to see the operational ground-level support that every single 3-letter agency here is doing, driving towards the same mission.
Texas National Guard troops were seen settling at an Army Reserve Center about 55 miles from Chicago, despite opposition from local leaders and a federal lawsuit to block the deployment. Texas Governor Greg Abbott wrote on X, the elite Texas National Guard are on the ground and ready to go. Governor J.B. Pritzker says the president is using soldiers as pawns, but Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche says federal law enforcement is stepping in because local leaders are failing to address crime.
What we saw was I think, the effect of the leadership of the state and of this city basically giving a free pass to criminals and to domestic terrorists to do anything they want in the city.
But Chicago's mayor strongly disagrees, saying federal actions are endangering civilians.
The federal government is out of control. This is one of the most dangerous times in our nation's history.
A federal judge will hear arguments from Illinois and Chicago on Thursday. Meanwhile, the Memphis Safe Task Force, a joint effort of more than 20 local, state, and federal agencies, have been actively deployed to work alongside local police in the city. A group of National Guard commanders is set to arrive on Friday, although those troops are not expected to take part in law enforcement.
A bipartisan effort in the Senate aims to counter the threats China poses to the U.S. and its allies in the Indo-Pacific. A foreign relations subcommittee is investigating illegal activities by the Chinese Communist Party. NTD's Arian Pastor has the takeaways from yesterday's hearing.
It is time to call out Beijing's behavior for what it actually is. It's illegal, coercive, aggressive, and deceptive.
Republican Senator Pete Ricketts highlights the threat posed by China in the Indo-Pacific, warning that the U.S. must take action. Democratic Senator Chris Coons agrees, saying China is America's main national security challenge.
For years, the national security establishment has correctly identified China as our central national security challenge. Today's hearing will explore China's gray zone activities, which are increasingly offering Beijing an asymmetric advantage.
The senator says such gray zone activities have been ignored by too many administrations in the past because they fall below the threshold of armed conflict, despite violating international law. He gave a few examples.
In Australia, a U.S. treaty ally, for the first time, we saw a large Chinese naval task group conduct a full circumnavigation of the continent and live fire exercises with no warning, an enormous show of force intended to intimidate Australia and send a signal to other regional states. Against Taiwan, record levels of incursion by the PLA into Taiwanese airspace and its economic zones, brazen election interference, cutting undersea cables, and much more.
A witness at Tuesday's hearing said the solution to the problem is to develop a comprehensive national counter-strategy. That's by using diplomatic, informational, economic, legal, cyber, and security instruments against China. Senator Ricketts asked the witness, a military veteran, how the U.S. could implement these countermeasures.
When you say strategy, help us understand specifically what you mean we should be doing.
Chairman Ricketts, thank you. I think it begins with having somebody whose responsibility it is to organize the campaign. China knows how to fill in all of those gaps in our bureaucracy. So however it is that we're organized, they will organize a counter-campaign utilizing their sort of fusion, their civil-military fusion organization to sort of push into the gaps. And so we need somebody whose job it is to build the counter-ICAD strategy and then to get everybody together.
But despite China's ongoing aggression, many say the Communist Party is not as strong as it portrays itself to be. Another witness described China's many weak points.
What are some specific steps that we could do that would remind Communist China that they've got vulnerabilities as well?
Let's not forget that the Chinese are almost wholly dependent on their food needs from other countries. These are countries where the United States has tremendous diplomatic leverage. Dr. Ratner mentioned energy vulnerabilities. These are pretty severe and intense for the Chinese. But also we have to remember that the Chinese economy is currently in a state of disarray.
He added that China's economy largely depends on exports to other countries and that this economic model is highly vulnerable to sanctions. He says the U.S. needs to make clear that Chinese state-owned entities and banks could become targets of U.S. financial sanctions. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
Lawmakers said in a recent hearing that multiple U.S. administrations had failed to counter China's program of territorial expansion. Joining us to discuss is Grant Newsham, retired U.S. Marine Colonel, former U.S. diplomat, and senior fellow at the Center for Security Policy. So good afternoon to you, Grant. Tell us, what is the overarching goal here behind China's years-long campaign of territorial expansion?
Well, the overarching goal is to drive the Americans out of the Asia Pacific, all the way to the American West Coast, and ultimately for China to fill in, to dominate and control the Pacific, and ultimately to surround the United States. And they're doing very well at it. They've also set up nicely in Latin America, Central America, the Caribbean, and into Africa as well. So their goals are global, but the immediate step is to get the Americans out. And that's what all this is initially about.
Do you think the U.S. or Western society know about this goal? Why has it been allowed to happen to this extent?
Well, it's been no secret. The Chinese have always been very clear about their objectives, and they telegraph their punches. And all you had to do was pay attention. But the allure of Chinese money, the China market, has been just too great. So everyone, the business class, financial class, too much of the political class, that was responsible for letting China into the World Trade Organization, giving them most favored nation status. They basically knew what was coming, but they wanted the money. And ultimately, China has launched a very effective political warfare subversion campaign to make the Americans, the rest of the free world, actually go along. There has been no consistent, coherent pushback on the Chinese until the first Trump administration, and even they were facing huge problems internally from people like the Secretary of Treasury. And so it's really the smell of Chinese money and very successful, said Chinese subversion against the people who might stop them. But it's been no secret. It's just been a collective decision not to recognize it. So hearings like this one they recently held is very good, but it does have an aspect of discovering gravity. This has been obvious for at least the last 15 years to anyone who cared to look.
So how close is China in achieving this overarching goal?
They've still got a ways to go. But if you compare where they were 10 years ago, it's breathtaking. Their influence throughout the entire region, and this is beyond, say, the Western Pacific. If you look at the whole map, look at the Central Pacific. In all the Pacific Islands, there's a very impressive and strong political Chinese presence. and their influence is nonstop, and they're continuing to try and subvert. And the idea is to bring countries and even bring some U.S. territories, such as Northern Marianas, around to seeing China as the better alternative, draw them away from the United States, away from the West. So it has been very effective. And this is combined at the same time with the Chinese military buildup, which is jaw-dropping when you stop and think about it, so they can exert their influence, they can project power farther and farther. And if you play this out 5-10 years, that they're going to be an even more formidable force for us to face. And also their economic influence, as is well known, that's everywhere. And you get countries like Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Taiwan, Philippines, South Korea, dependent on the China market, and well, they suddenly become a lot less strict in their dealings with the PRC. They're more willing to overlook Chinese aggression and to feel like, well, they just can't do anything because they'll upset the economic relationship. So this is a sort of a coherent, sort of concerted, multifaceted approach by the Chinese that started a long time ago. It continues apace right now, and they've done very well at it. Still got a ways to go, but if you look at the progress they've made, it's very depressing when you consider the future, unless the West and the United States wakes up and does something.
So Senator Chris Coons actually compared China's strategy to Putin's. If you think Crimea, if you think Ukraine, is that a fair comparison? Is there anything you'd like to add to that comparison?
Unfortunately, it's much worse. The Chinese are better than the Russians. Putin's efforts in Ukraine and Crimea, this is basically military. It's just hard power, sheer force. There is some subversion that's gone on, but basically this is just like a mafia boss throwing his weight around. In the case of the Chinese, they do it very differently. And the military part, the hard power part, is actually bringing up the rear. What you have at the start with the Chinese is a commercial presence that leads to political influence. It's all greased with bribery. And you create a constituency in your target country that sees China as really harmless and somebody you can do business with. And also, you'll have this constituency actually pushing Chinese interests. As I said, it's not just other countries, but you'll see this phenomenon on display in the United States, in Washington. Read Peter Schweizer's books. And once again, back to the Commonwealth of Northern Marianas. They have got a pro-China business constituency there that is very much pushing China's interests. And you have members of the political class who are also carrying China's water for them. So I say the military just comes last when it comes to the Chinese. With the case of the Russians, it comes first. So the Chinese, unfortunately, are a much tougher opponent than the Russians are.
So, Colonel, as you know, the 2016 International Court ruling invalidated China's claims in the South China Sea, for example, and yet Beijing ignored it. Can you talk to us about the effectiveness of international law in curbing China's claims?
Well, when it comes to the PRC, the effectiveness of international law is, I suppose there's some figure that's less than zero, but it doesn't really amount to much. The Chinese don't care about their reputation unless it's combined with something else, like real economic pressure, like exposing the Chinese Communist Party leadership's corruption, their overseas wealth. But a ruling itself doesn't amount to much. It could have had some effect in this case, however, and so knowing some history helps. Back in 2016, after the ruling was issued, it was overwhelmingly in the Philippines' favor. The Americans did nothing. The Obama administration, they purposely did not mention it because they didn't want to embarrass the Chinese. The idea was if they backed off, well, the Chinese would behave better. Well, the Chinese took that as a sort of a sign to let's go ahead. And also this ruling was the result of a suit filed by the Filipinos after the Chinese took over Philippine territory at Scarborough Shoal in 2012. They bamboozled the then Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for East Asia Pacific, Kurt Campbell. So he got the Filipinos to pull out from the Scarborough Shoals, and he accepted a Chinese promise that they would as well. The Chinese didn't. The Americans and the Secretary and the administration did nothing. So you had this ruling come out. A few years later, the Americans encouraged the Filipinos to do it. They got the ruling, and the Americans did nothing. Well, that demoralized the Filipinos again, to put it mildly. And the Chinese could size up their opponents. They saw that these were Americans and administration that would do nothing to stop them. And thus you've got this Chinese expansion that the hearing described very well. It's just gone full speed ever since. The only thing that gave them a hiccup was the first Trump administration and that very good lineup that they had handling China affairs. So knowing some history is important. It's good that you actually brought this up.
So, Colonel, as you were speaking and you saw we were playing the footage of the confrontation between the Chinese ship and the Philippine ship, can you describe for us the CCP's use of its Coast Guard and civilian-looking vessels and fishing fleets?
Well, the Chinese do this as a sort of matter of course. One, they've got a lot of these ships, and also if they use them, they can then claim, well, look, this is just law enforcement action, or this is just fishing boats, not stating that it's their maritime militia, which is part of the People's Armed Police. But they use this as a tool of force, intimidation, and they have really been going all out against the Filipinos. The Filipinos, of course, are waiting for the Americans to actually show up and help them, as the treaty, they thought that the security treaty requires. And it's not just the Filipinos. The Chinese have the numbers, and they're using these resources, these ships, say, against the Japanese and against the Japanese Senkaku Islands. It's very aggressive. It continues. And they use it against the Koreans. They'll use it everywhere, but they've got the resources to do it. And the Chinese Coast Guard, the maritime militia, the fishing fleet have effectively had de facto control of the South China Sea since the late 2010s. So this is not a future problem, but it's really a tool in the Chinese toolkit, and they use it very aggressively. And also when they say, well, this is not a naval ship, it has this paralyzing effect on the Americans in particular, and Westerners in general, is they just don't know what to do. They have no response to it, instead of recognizing it for what it is, which is a tool of really Chinese military might in order to take territory, to bully and intimidate, and respond accordingly. But also don't respond always tit for tat, but you respond asymmetrically. As I mentioned earlier, expose Xi Jinping and his top cronies' wealth overseas, and that will get their attention very quickly. It's just one tool. So you can economic sanctions, stop allowing any technology exports to China. Don't allow Chinese investments in the United States of any sort. And that will get their attention. China tells you what they don't like. And one of the things that scares them, one is trade, and also trade sanctions, but also the free nations getting together to defend themselves in unison. They hate that, and they will tell you that. So look at what the Chinese complain about and do more of it. And you'll have a pretty good strategy to employ.
Okay, Colonel, we just have a tiny bit of time left, and I want to squeeze in one more question here. Can you talk to us about the strategy of China building artificial islands?
Well, that they've have used this to build these huge military bases in the South China Sea, contrary to the international law, the international court's ruling. And they have gone about this since started roughly about 2013. And now they have these really very, very substantial military bases in the South China Sea. It allows them to really assert and demonstrate their control, their domination, and also you can use it for offensive operations when the time comes. When this all was happening, once again, the aforementioned Kurt Campbell didn't do much, but also you had senior American military leaders in the Pacific who knew what was coming, but they would not talk about it publicly. They would complain privately to visitors, but they wouldn't speak up about it. The US administration, the Obama administration, didn't want to say anything that would upset the Chinese. But the military leaders would even joke about this as the Great Wall of Sand, saying that they would take it out in the first hour or two of a war. Well, that sort of bold talk didn't amount to much. It didn't stop the Chinese, and they have gone all out in this island building. Which has really put us in a very difficult position and put our friends in an even more difficult position because they can see who seems to have the momentum, who seems to have the will to actually respond to Chinese aggression. And sometimes it looks like we're sort of lacking in this regard, but it isn't something that appeared yesterday. It's been going on for about the last 12, 13 years. And as I said, the most senior US military officers in Washington and in the Pacific really ought to return whatever end-of-tour awards they received for their performance here. This didn't happen as the result of leprechauns at work, but it was really, unfortunately, American officials, uniformed and civilian, who allowed this to happen. And we did not push back, partly fearing, well, we would lose Chinese money from the China market. And we've gotten ourselves into this mess, and now we dig ourselves out of it. We still have cards to play. But it is important to remember how we got here, who got us here, and to now, one, not listen to their advice anymore, but actually go about rolling the Chinese back, putting them on the back foot. And as I mentioned earlier, you do have, when you hear these so-called gray zone operations by the Chinese that hamstring and paralyze the West and the Americans, well, look at these as acts of war and respond accordingly. Anything else isn't going to get you very far with the PRC. So you can't blame the Chinese for taking advantage of a confused opponent. But you do have to wake up and start responding in a way that the Chinese understand and appreciate.
Okay, well, Colonel, well said. As always, we appreciate you coming on to talk to us about this.
Well, thanks very much for having me.
Day 8 of the government shutdown. Lawmakers are still at an impasse. Will they pivot to emergency measures to pay troops and air traffic controllers to avoid flight delays? We have that after the break.
I'm Jonathan Lawson. If you're 50 to 85, please listen closely. The lock I want to talk to you about isn't the one on your door. It's a rate lock for your life insurance that guarantees that once you're insured, your rate can never go up at any time for any reason. Many policies you see don't have one, but you can get a lifetime rate lock from Colonial Penn. This plan was designed for people on a fixed income with coverage options that start at $9.95 a month. That's less than 35 cents a day. Your rate is locked in for life. Coverage can never be canceled, and your acceptance is guaranteed. You cannot be turned down because of your health. See for yourself. Call for an information kit and gift. Both are free with no obligation.
Call 1-800-624-6556 for your free information and your free gift. That's 1-800-624-6556. 1-800-624-6556. Call now.
Hunger in America is a crisis. Let's end it together. Our America. Built on hard work, determination, and grit. Sometimes the days run long, but hope, it never runs out, even when the food does, for America's veterans, working parents, even kids. Because in every corner of every town, even yours, millions of hard-working neighbors are facing a hunger crisis, many for the very first time. In this land of plenty, affording food shouldn't require second jobs and third shifts or choosing between your groceries and bills. Today, you can help change that. Call or go online to helpfeedingamerica.org and give $19 a month, less than 63 cents a day, to help every neighbor get the food they urgently need. Because taking care of each other is what makes America strong. We're Feeding America, not just a name, but an action. Working with over 200 local food banks like the ones in your community, and demand is soaring.
You go to the grocery store, you spend $100, and $100 is a new $20 bill.
Even with 2 full-time jobs, it's hard to make ends meet.
These are tough times, but when we stand together, we become the very best of a strong America. Call or go online to helpfeedingamerica.org. Just $19 a month can feed a family today. And your first gift can double an impact. Plus, we'll send you this free canvas bag as a reminder of the hope you're delivering.
When it comes down to it, it's about taking care of your family first and the loved ones that you need to provide for.
Because you're not just giving food, you're fueling resilience for people across the nation. You're feeding America. Call or go online today to helpfeedingamerica.org, and your gift can double an impact.
On Capitol Hill, lawmakers remain at an impasse on reopening the government. The 6th vote has failed on the Senate floor moments ago. Will lawmakers pass emergency pay for certain workers? NTD's Melina Weisskopf reports.
As the stalemate between lawmakers leaves the government shutdown for the 8th day in a row, House Speaker Mike Johnson got visibly heated this morning, responding to a question about if lawmakers should consider an emergency measure to keep troops and air traffic controllers paid.
We already had that vote. It's called the CR. Every Republican and at least one Democrat had the common sense to say, of course we want the government to stay in operation. Of course, keep the government open. The first responsibility, I'm sorry, I'm aggravated. The first responsibility of the government is to protect the people. And the people who are supposed to be protected are being completely cheated.
He said this type of show vote, as he described it, is exactly what Democrats want. But Johnson insisted this morning that the only answer is for Democrats to join Republicans in the Senate on the continuing resolution that the House already passed. That's a change in tune from yesterday when he expressed openness to such an idea, but the Senate leader quickly dismissed it.
We're monitoring it day by day. I'm certainly open to that. We've done it in the past. We want to make sure that our troops are paid, our troops.
And honestly, I mean, you don't need that.
Another question bubbling up is whether federal workers will receive back pay during their time out.
Every single furloughed federal employee is entitled to back pay. Period. Full stop. The law is clear.
It's technically the law since 2019 that those workers will get paid back, but a White House draft legal memo is circulating that questions whether non-essential federal employees who are furloughed right now and currently not working due to the shutdown are entitled to back pay. President Trump said this about it just yesterday.
It depends on who we're talking about. I can tell you this, the Democrats have put a lot of people in great risk and jeopardy, but it really depends on who you're talking about. But for the most part, we're going to take care of our people. There are some people that really don't deserve to be taken care of, and we'll take care of them in a different way.
So ultimately, it depends how the White House decides to handle the matter. While back pay for federal workers is in limbo, the White House has committed to keeping the nutrition program for women and children, known as WIC, running, announcing it would use revenue collected from Trump's tariffs to continue funding WIC benefits while the federal government remains shuttered. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
The FAA says air traffic control staffing issues are delaying flights at airports across the country. The delays come amid a week-long government shutdown. Newark, Phoenix, Denver, Las Vegas, and Burbank were among the affected airports. According to FlightAware, more than 4,000 flights have been delayed. That includes 29% of arriving flights at Denver, 19% of Newark flights, and 15% of Las Vegas flights. Some 13,000 air traffic controllers and about 50,000 TSA officers must still show up for work without pay. Controllers are set to receive a partial paycheck on October 14th for work performed before the shutdown. The Senate has confirmed 107 Trump nominees to fill vacant government positions. The confirmations include 24 ambassadors, over a dozen U.S. attorneys, and several assistant secretaries for various departments, such as the Treasury, the Interior, Energy, and Defense. They were confirmed all at once yesterday thanks to a rule change Republicans made last month known as the nuclear option. It lets them approve certain nominees as a group instead of one by one. GOP leaders say it was the only way to clear a backlog of stalled nominations, despite fierce opposition from Democrats. The change only applies to lower-level executive nominees, not cabinet members or federal judges. Tuesday's final vote of 51-47 fell strictly along party lines. A Senate hearing is underway looking into allegations that government agencies pushed tech companies to censor freedom of speech under the Biden administration. Here is testimony from independent journalist Alex Branson.
Going back to 2020, the company had previously defended my right to speak as third parties demanded I be censored because Twitter believed that it should be a place where free speech and debate were encouraged. Ultimately, at the time of my suspension, Twitter's top executives, including then chief executive Jack Dorsey, secretly believed the company should not have suspended me. But the Twitter lobbyists who faced the Biden administration's pressure most directly went around them to orchestrate my ban. In the words he wrote to another Twitter official just days before he silenced me, this lobbyist hoped, quote, to keep the target off our back.
The hearing is expanding on a censorship report recently released by Senator Ted Cruz. It alleges the Biden administration's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency ran a secret censorship campaign. The report concluded the agency violated the First Amendment by pressuring social media companies to censor Americans with conflicting views from the Biden administration. It's a practice known as jawboning.
Did the White House specifically say what they would do to Twitter?
Well, so they specifically, well, they publicly said that they were going to reconsider Section 230. That was, again, in July. And they had privately said to Twitter in April, they had, based on Twitter's own records, said a really, quote unquote, a really hard question about why I was still being allowed to speak, which from my point of view and my lawyer's point of view, that all by itself was a First Amendment violation because it forced Twitter to start looking at me in a way that Twitter had not previously done. And that was in secret. And, you know, and I'll say this.
And again, there was no transparency.
No transparency.
That Mr. Davis spoke in.
Yes. So, I mean, look, I don't like what Brendan Carr did, but he did it publicly, and we can have a debate about it. What's really problematic is when the government goes in secret to these companies and targets individual users or individual categories of speech. And I think that that shouldn't be allowed.
The hearing was looking into legislative ways to protect Americans from jawboning. A California jury has ordered Johnson & Johnson to pay $966 million in its latest talcum powder lawsuit. It comes after the company was found liable in a lawsuit claiming its baby powder products cause cancer. The family of a woman named May Moore claimed she died of a rare cancer caused by the powder and sued Johnson & Johnson. Family claimed the company's powder was contaminated with asbestos, a carcinogen, which Johnson & Johnson has denied. The company stopped selling the powder 2 years ago after being hit with tens of thousands of lawsuits. According to court documents, $950 million is in punitive damages and $16 million is compensatory damages. Johnson & Johnson says it plans to appeal the verdict. The Supreme Court is hearing arguments in a lawsuit challenging an Illinois law that governs how mail-in ballots received after Election Day are counted. The case is about who can challenge this law rather than about the process of counting mail-in ballots. Joining us to discuss this is Keith Groves, former assistant state attorney and prosecutor in the state of Florida. Keith is also a legal analyst. So Keith, good afternoon to you. Thank you for joining us. Can you talk to us big picture-wise? How significant is this case in the grand scheme of things?
Well, so far, it's not particularly significant, but what we're seeing in the early stages is pretty typical, where the court argues that the parties before it lack standing, which is often frustrating to those of us on the outside watching because it means the court may not get to the merits of the case itself.
Okay, Keith, can you give us a brief overview of the main arguments here for those who are not very legal savvy?
Well, when you look at who has the right to vote and who has the right to challenge that, it really hinges on the court's analysis of whether or not the parties who bring the lawsuit are in fact directly affected and directly harmed by whatever it is they're seeking to undo. The court looks at many of these arguments and they say, well, the person before us currently who is bringing this is not directly harmed, and therefore they lack standing to bring the issue.
Okay, were there any indications of the leanings of the justices, which way they're showing preference to?
Not that I could see, but it's very frequent that you'll see cases like this dismissed for lack of standing. We saw a lot of cases where the 2020 election results were being challenged in court. Most of those cases were dismissed, not because the merits showed that there was no issue with the 2020 election, but because the court ruled that the party bringing the case lacked standing.
Can you also speak to, previously lower courts actually threw out this case, right? What were the reasons for that?
Those cases were generally thrown out for lack of standing, because in order to bring a case like this, you've got to demonstrate a concrete injury that is ripe for the court to address. If there's no way for the court to grant the relief being sought, then there's no case to hear, and the court says that they lack jurisdiction because of the lack of standing.
So, Keith, the American Civil Liberties Union supports this appeal as a right to bring a lawsuit of this kind, would also apply to civil rights groups. Can you talk to us about the impact here? What could this case mean for the future of lawsuits over voting procedures?
Well, it could really change who has the ability to enforce those constitutional rights, the right to vote. When you look at a situation where you've got a third party, a group, an organization like the ACLU, generally they're bringing the case on behalf of their members. Now, courts have generally recognized that groups can bring cases on behalf of their members if those members would have standing. We've seen this a lot in other contexts, and we're going to see a further analysis of that under this case with regard to the ACLU and whether or not the underlying members have the legal right to challenge these laws.
Is there any intersection between the federal law governing the timing of elections with state laws that permit counting of ballots after Election Day?
There's a little bit of gray area there. Generally, elections are controlled by the states. You know, the Constitution doesn't give the federal government the power to control state elections. There's some overlap and some gray area with regard to federal elections, however, and what standards may be enforced regarding federal elections. So there are a lot of people in Washington who want to ensure that federal elections include only valid citizens as voters, and there are many states who think that it's okay to allow non-citizens to vote, and many states and municipalities who allow non-citizens to vote in state and municipal elections. The federal government could assert its interest in securing the federal elections, but may stay out of the state election component.
So, Keith, would you mind speaking to the outcomes of this case potentially? And depending on that outcome, what could happen next?
One of the things that really hangs in the balance is whether or not the fate of the United States government will be decided by citizens or non-citizens. If states are able to allow non-citizens to vote, and if the court doesn't allow a real hearing on the merits with regard to this, we could see an odd situation where the federal government and the state government are at odds about who is allowed to vote. Ultimately, if we believe our elections should only include U.S. citizens, it's important that states all align with federal policy to block non-citizens from voting.
Okay, just one final question, Keith. Do you think the outcome of this case could impact other states with similar laws?
Certainly it could. You know, it depends. Generally speaking, the only areas where this case would be binding would be those areas within the same appellate jurisdiction. That said, when there is an appellate court decision striking down something like this or declaring that it is permissible, you're likely to see it travel on and this case to be heard further in the Supreme Court, particularly if you see different results from different appellate courts. If, say, the appellate court on one side of the country decides a different result than the appellate court on the other side of the country, that's something called a circuit split, and that generally encourages the Supreme Court to get involved and resolve the conflict.
Well, all right, Keith, well said. We really appreciate you coming on. Thank you.
Thank you.
A suspect has been arrested in connection with the deadly Palisades fire in California that destroyed thousands of homes and killed 12 people. Authorities say digital evidence and his behavior that night link him to the fire. Stay tuned for that story and more after this break.
My name's Stacy, I'm 57, and I was adopted in 2020.
We were adopted in 2019.
And we were adopted in 2021.
We had a house, and it sounds crazy, but it wasn't a home. The one thing that Jake and Emma brought is it became a home.
When I met Dakota, he had just turned 14.
You weren't there for the first this and the first that. I missed the first words, but we got a lot of other firsts.
Watching her say, oh my God, I cannot believe I got my license. And she's like, I passed. And I'm like, girl.
See them grow. It is.
They chose to love us. They didn't have to. They chose us. Family.
You and you. Kids in the middle.
What I thought was a complete life was nowhere near complete, but it is now.
Learn about adopting a teen from foster care. You can't imagine the reward. Visit adoptuskids.org.
My mom and dad were traditional Asian parents. And my father would go to work before I woke up in the morning. And then he would come home too tired to play with me. I tell my son, I love you every single day. Now, my dad has never said that to me. Not because he doesn't love me, but because culturally it wasn't comfortable for him. So I teased him the other day and I said, "How come you never say that to me?" And he said, "You're too old now." Now that he's a grandfather, he says, "I love you" to my son every time he sees him. My advice to all the fathers out there, forget the material things, forget the cultural restrictions. They grow up way too fast for you to waste even a single precious minute or moment.
Say bye-bye. Bye-bye.
During high school, I hung with the wrong crowd and I never graduated.
I helped Santiago in many different ways, like all fathers do, because he always wanted to go to college.
I felt a little embarrassed to come back to school, but eventually, once I came here, I knew that it's for a bigger goal.
He was very dedicated, hardworking. He connected with his teachers. He connected with other students. That was one of the key reasons why he was able to keep forging ahead.
It was amazing to see him graduate. This was one thing that meant so much to him, and of course, it meant so much to us too.
With the help of my father and having my son, that was all the motivation that I needed. That support is everything.
Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org.
Federal and local officials announced a major breakthrough today in the investigation into January's Palisades fire in California. After 8 months of intensive work, authorities confirmed the arrest of a suspect in connection with the fire.
A 29-year-old Jonathan Rinderknecht for igniting a fire that ultimately burned down the Palisades earlier this year, killing 12 people, destroying more than 6,800 structures, both homes and businesses, and damaging over 1,000 more buildings. The complaint unsealed today charges the defendant with destruction of property by means of fire, a felony that carries a mandatory minimum 5-year federal prison sentence and is punishable by up to 20 years in federal prison. The allegations in the affidavit are supported by digital evidence, including the defendant's ChatGPT prompt of a dystopian painting showing in part a burning forest and a crowd fleeing from it.
Rinderknecht is accused of starting the Lackman fire on New Year's Eve, which later reignited as the Palisades fire. Prosecutors say he dropped off passengers in Pacific Palisades before walking up a near trail where he allegedly set the fire. Officials say the allegations are supported by his phone data, false statements, and a ChatGPT-generated image depicting a burning city. He was arrested near his Florida home and is expected to appear in federal court in Orlando later today. The Nobel Prize for Chemistry was announced today. 3 scientists share the prize for their work in the development of metal-organic frameworks that dates back to 1989. Here's that announcement.
The Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences has today decided to award the 2025 Nobel Prize in Chemistry to Susumu Kitagawa, Kyoto University, Japan, Richard Robson, University of Melbourne, Australia, and Omar Yagi, University of California at Berkeley, USA, for the development of metal organic frameworks.
It was the 3rd prize announced this week. The Nobel Committee said 3 laureates have created molecular constructions with large spaces through which gases and other chemicals can flow. The constructions can be used to harvest water from desert air, capture carbon dioxide, store toxic gases, or catalyze chemical reactions. The trio's research dates back to 1989. This year's Nobel announcements continue with the Literature Prize on Thursday. The Nobel Peace Prize will be announced on Friday, and the Economics Prize next Monday. Thousands gathered at Montana State University's brick Brendan Field House last night for a Turning Point USA event. Eager for a night of political discussion, NTD's Daniel Monahan has the key takeaways from the gathering, which featured entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy.
Doors opened at 5 p.m. and students filled the 3,300 seats quickly. Many were waiting from early morning to secure front row spots. Those in attendance honored Charlie Kirk.
Turn us away from divisiveness,
separation, and violence.
Candidate for Ohio Governor Vivek Ramaswamy called on those in attendance to remember the tragedy of Charlie Kirk's assassination.
For years, college students with conservative views, like many of you, were taught to shut up, sit down, and keep their views to themselves.
Ramaswamy says Charlie Kirk helped usher in a new dawn in America.
Young conservatives, like many of you, started to feel free to speak in the open again as proud Americans. You showed up at the ballot box last November in unprecedented droves to re-elect Donald Trump to his second term as U.S. president. You all did that.
The entrepreneur says conservatives stand at a fork in the road for the future of the conservative movement.
Do we play the left's game? Silencing, canceling, punishing, authorizing the government to pick winners and losers in the private sector? Or do we stick to the principles of the American founding? Freedom, merit, the rule of law, the pursuit of excellence. It is a fork in the road for our movement, and I believe the answer is crystal clear. We don't care about owning the libs, not anymore. We care about owning responsibility for saving our country. It is not just about what we stand against, but what we actually stand for. Individual, family, nation, and God. Beats race, gender, sexuality, and climate.
The evening wrapped up with high energy and a spirited Q&A session. A young attendee asked Ramaswamy whether his Hindu faith conflicted with conservative values or Charlie Kirk's message. Ramaswamy pointed out that he's running for governor of Ohio and not pastor of Ohio. He invited the young man on stage, gave him a copy of the U.S. Constitution, and had him read Article 6.
No religious test shall ever be required as qualification to any office or public trust under the United States.
Turning Point USA, founded by Charlie Kirk, says each stop is a chance to honor Charlie's mission and keep the fight alive. The organization says free speech is only free if people use their voices. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Disney fans will have to pay a little extra to enjoy its theme parks. Certain ticket prices for Walt Disney World in Orlando, Florida, and Disneyland Resort in Anaheim, California are up. Disney news organization MickeyVisit.com broke down some of the numbers. According to Mickey Visit, a one-day Tier 0 ticket for Disneyland will remain at $104. However, the most expensive one-day pass Tier 6 has increased by $18 to $224. Disneyland's most expensive 5-day Hopper ticket is up by $39 to $655. Tickets for Disney World are up as well. Certain one-day prices for November and December 2026 are up from $199 to $209. Visitors can expect higher ticket prices on peak days like Thanksgiving and New Year's Eve. Turning now to the UK, two sides are trading blame after the collapse of a trial involving two men accused of spying for China. The men were charged last year with violating the Official Secrets Act. They were accused of providing information that might be useful to an enemy between 2021 and 2023. But prosecutors dropped the charges last month, saying there is not enough evidence. Conservative Party lawmakers accused the government, the Labour government that is, of deliberately collapsing the trial to avoid upsetting China. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer denied these allegations. He said the previous Conservative government, which was in power when the alleged spying occurred, didn't refer to China as an enemy. Here's Starmer.
We were disappointed that the trial didn't proceed, but the position is very clear that the trial would have had to take place on the basis of the situation as it was at the time under the previous Tory government. So whatever their position was the only position that could be presented at trial. So it wasn't as well this government's position, it was the Tory government before's position.
Britain's chief prosecutor, Stephen Parkinson, said his office did everything possible to prosecute the two men. He blamed the government for the collapse of the case. To prove the case under the Official Secrets Act, prosecutors would have had to show the defendants were acting for an enemy. Parkinson said his office was unable to do so because the UK government does not refer to China as an enemy or a threat to national security. Identical twins Hugo and Ross Turner are set to climb Nepal's Mera Peak in October, one outfitted in a forensic replica of George Mallory's 1924 Everest expedition gear, and the other in modern equipment to study the impact of clothing systems on performance in extreme environments. Here are the details.
These 36-year-old British twins are getting ready to climb a section of the Himalayas for science. What separates the professional explorers will be their kit. Hugo Turner is stepping back in time.
Yeah, it's very adequate.
He'll be outfitted in a forensic replica of George Mallory's 1924 Everest expedition gear, which includes hand-stitched layers of wool, silk, and gabardine.
All the layers exactly what he would have had 100 years ago, so...
His twin Ross will wear modern, high-altitude gear supplied by Montaigne.
I am wearing pretty much exactly what I'm going to be wearing in the Himalaya.
Their expedition up Nepal's over 21,000-foot Mira Peak is part of a study that will test clothing performance under extreme cold and low oxygen. The twins, with support from the University of Portsmouth, will collect data as they climb. Researchers will monitor their body temperature, dexterity, cognition, and stress hormones. Ross says being genetically identical allows the comparison to be plausible.
We like to train in a similar way before these expeditions, so we are as identical as possible. Being genetically identical while we're on the mountain allows the science, the study of each kit to be brought together so we can almost look side by side.
The study will generate comparative data sets to inform product development and safety guidance for cold weather operations. It also hopes to shed light on equipment factors surrounding the 1924 British Everest expedition, during which Mallory and partner Andrew Irvin disappeared. Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay are widely regarded as the first climbers, confirmed to reach Everest summit in 1953, though Ross says it's possible Mallory could have made it first, years before.
I think from what we've started to understand about this kit, particularly in the cold chamber here at the University of Portsmouth's Extreme Environments Laboratory, is he probably could have. There's definitely question marks over the kit's ability, particularly some of the stuff you're looking at now, but the raw data shows us there's not much to be extremely worried about.
We have breaking news. Derek Groves, who escaped from a New Orleans jail in May, has been captured in Atlanta. The U.S. Marshal Service says law enforcement captured him after a standoff at a home in the southwestern part of Atlanta. He was found hiding in the residence. Groves then was the last of 10 inmates to be captured after breaking out of the New Orleans Paris jail, which was one of the most high-profile jailbreaks in Louisiana in decades. Groves was convicted of second-degree murder and serving life in prison. He shot and killed 2 people and injured several others at a block party. His girlfriend has been in custody and facing charges for helping him escape. All right, taking a break now. President Trump is holding a roundtable discussion on Antifa at the White House. We have that and more after this break.
A performance that truly matters for each and every one of us. This is what you've been waiting for. Get tickets now at shenyun.com.
The bladder control aisle. You won't shop here again. Your private business is your own. The constant struggle is over. Now there's a better way. It's HDIS. We home deliver bladder control products. We understand how you feel. For over 25 years, we've home delivered to many of the 20 million Americans who deal with incontinence. We offer all brands. We pay shipping and use plain, unmarked boxes. If we can help you or someone you care for, call for your free product sample pack and $45 in money-saving coupons. Our counselors will help you choose the right product. And unlike stores, we're always in stock. You'll get what you need. Satisfaction guaranteed. HDIS, the better way.
For your free sample pack with your free catalog, $45 in money-saving coupons, and free product samples, call 1-800-701-6159. That's 1-800-701-6159.
Kids love it. Parents trust it. Obviously. Explore GJW Plus Kids Series and Gone Gion Campus courses led by expert educators. This is spectacular. Children will learn values like respect, responsibility, and knowledge in language, science, and more.
Wow.
All while having fun.
Perfect.
Subscribe today at GJW Plus Kids, where learning meets fun.
We come from a long line of farmers, and there's a sense of pride with being part of these multi-generational businesses. But there's also a significant amount of pressure. My senior year of high school, my dad made the decision that this world no longer needed him in it. I don't know if he was overwhelmed by the bills and checks that weren't going to be coming in because of the strawberries dying off.